The dust motes danced in the amber shafts of late afternoon light that cut through the grimy windows of riverside storage. David Chen stood at the back of the crowd, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a jacket that had seen better days. Much like everything else in his life, the auctioneer's voice echoed off the concrete walls like a funeral dirge. Each going once, going twice, another nail in the coffin of someone's abandoned dreams. "Unit 47, the auctioneer called out, his voice cutting through the humid Texas air. "Belonged to Harold Grayson, been abandoned for 18 months. Starting bid is $50. David's chest tightened. Harold Grayson, his neighbor. The old man who'd lived 3 houses down from David's foreclosed home. The same house where David had built his construction company from the ground up, only to watch it crumble when the housing market collapsed. Harold had been the one person who'd never looked at David with pity when the bank trucks came. He just nodded, like he understood something about loss that others didn't. The metal roll-up door groaned as it lifted, revealing a cavern of shadows and forgotten belongings. Even from 30 feet away, David could smell it, that particular cocktail of mothballs, old paper, and time itself. Cardboard boxes sat stacked like tombstones, some labeled in Harold's precise handwriting, others bearing the yellow stains of age and neglect. "What do you see in there, folks?" The auctioneer's practiced enthusiasm felt obscene in the sacred space of Harold's remnants. "Looks like we got some furniture, boxes of personal items, might be some antiques. Who knows what treasures are hiding in those boxes?" A woman in designer jeans, clearly a weekend warrior looking for quick flips, raised her paddle. 50, 60. Called out Big Jim Morrison, a regular who bought storage units like other people bought lottery tickets. His massive frame cast a shadow over the smaller bidders as he adjusted his oil-stained baseball cap. David watched the bidding like a spectator at his own execution. He had exactly $73 in his wallet, the remainder of his last unemployment check. Not enough for groceries, let alone competing with these vultures picking over Harold's bones. But something nagged at him. Harold had always been secretive, paranoid even. David remembered the old man's rants about the government watching and curses following money. Most people had written Harold off as another conspiracy theorist. But David had seen the fear in his neighbor's roomy blue eyes. Real fear, the kind that comes from experience, not imagination. 100, the designer jeans woman called out, her voice sharp with impatience. 125, Big Jim countered without hesitation. David's hand moved before his brain could stop it. 150. The words hung in the dusty air like an accusation. Every head turned toward him, and David felt the familiar burn of scrutiny. These people knew him, the local boy who'd made good, then lost everything. Their stares felt like hot brands on his skin. Big Jim's eyes narrowed. "You got that kind of money, Chen." 175, David replied, his voice steadier than his hands. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air like a sword of Damocles. "Going once, going twice, 200. Big Jim spat, clearly annoyed that the broke contractor was wasting his time. David's heart hammered against his ribs. 250 would clean him out completely, leave him with maybe enough gas money to get home. But Harold's voice echoed in his memory. "Some things ain't meant to be found, David. Some doors should stay locked." 250. The auctioneer's gavel fell like thunder. "Sold to the gentleman in the back." Fay Act 2 Fay. The discovery Fay the lock cut away easily. Harold had always been more concerned with keeping people out than keeping his belongings secure. David pushed the door up with a screech of protesting metal and stepped into the mouth of the unit. The air inside felt thick, pregnant with secrets, and the ghost of Old Spice aftershave that Harold had worn every day for the 30 years David had known him. The beam of David's flashlight carved through the darkness, revealing a landscape of cardboard mountains and furniture graveyards. An old recliner sat in the corner like a throne. its brown leather cracked and bleeding stuffing. Photo albums were stacked on a wooden television tray, their plastic covers clouded with age. But it was the boxes that drew David's attention, dozens of them, all labeled in Harold's methodical script. Taxes 1987 to 1995, military records, Virginia's things. Virginia, Harold's wife, dead these past 15 years. David remembered the funeral, how Harold had stood at the graveside like a statue, his face carved from granite, while the preacher talked about God's plan. Harold had never been the same after that. David began with the nearest box, lifting the cardboard lid to reveal layers of newspaper from 1994. Underneath, wrapped in tissue paper like religious artifacts, were Virginia's things: a pearl necklace, tarnished with time, a wedding ring in a velvet box, a bundle of love letters tied with a pink ribbon that had faded to the color of old roses. The second box yielded Harold's military medals from Vietnam, each one nestled in its own compartment like sleeping soldiers: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Good Conduct Medal. Below them, wrapped in an American flag, was a photograph of young soldiers grinning at the camera, their faces bright with the invincibility of youth. Harold was there in the center, 19 years old and beautiful in the way that only the not yet broken can be. It was in the third box that David found it. His fingers brushed against something plastic at the bottom, beneath layers of bank statements and insurance policies. When he pulled it out, his breath caught in his throat. A lottery ticket. Not just any lottery ticket. A Mega Millions ticket with a date from 2 years ago. The numbers stared up at him like accusatory eyes. 7 to 14, -21, -28, -35. Mega Ball 10, David's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, the screen casting a harsh blue glow in the dusty darkness. The lottery website loaded with agonizing slowness, each second stretching like hours. When the winning numbers finally appeared, David's world tilted on its axis. 7 to 14, -21, -28, -35, Mega Ball 10. Perfect match. The jackpot had been $22 million, unclaimed. David's legs gave out, and he sat heavily on the concrete floor, the ticket clutched in his shaking hands. $22 million. Enough to pay off his debts, buy back his house, restart his company. Enough to stop the collection calls, the sleepless nights, the crushing weight of failure that had been grinding him down for 3 years. But Harold hadn't claimed it. For 2 years this ticket had sat in a box in a storage unit, gathering dust like all the other forgotten treasures of a dead man's life. Why? Harold had been poor, scraping by on Social Security and veterans' benefits. This ticket was a golden rope thrown to a drowning man, and he'd let it sink into the darkness. David's flashlight beam caught something else at the bottom of the box. A manila envelope marked "Important" in Harold's shaky handwriting. Inside was a letter written on Harold's ancient typewriter, each word struck with the deliberate force of a man who believed what he was saying. Asterisk to whoever finds this, the ticket is cursed. I know how that sounds, but I've seen what money like this can do. It followed me from Vietnam through every job I lost, every friend who died, every piece of happiness that got torn away. Virginia believed it too near the end. She made me promise never to use it. Some things are meant to stay buried. Some doors should never be opened. The numbers came to me in a dream the night Virginia died, and I knew they were a test. I failed that test. Don't make the same mistake I did. Burn the ticket. Burn this letter. Walk away and don't look back. Harold Grayson, asterisk. David read the letter 3 times, each word etching itself deeper into his consciousness. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built a successful business from nothing, screamed that this was nonsense, superstitious ravings from a lonely old man who'd watched too many horror movies. But another part of him, a deeper part that remembered the look in Harold's eyes during his last days, whispered that some truths couldn't be measured with spreadsheets and profit margins. A sound outside the unit made David look up. Footsteps on gravel growing closer. He quickly stuffed the ticket and letter into his jacket pocket and moved toward the door. Big Jim's massive silhouette filled the entrance, his small eyes glittering with predatory interest. "Find anything good in there, Chen?" Big Jim's voice was casual, but David caught the undercurrent of threat. "Just old furniture and photographs, nothing valuable." David stepped out of the unit, pulling the door down behind him with deliberate nonchalance. Big Jim's laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. "That is what they all say. You sure you didn't find something that might help with your money troubles? Word around town is you are pretty desperate these days." David met his gaze without flinching. "Word around town says a lot of things, Jim. Most of them aren't true." But as David walked away, he could feel Big Jim's eyes boring into his back like drill bits, and in his pocket the lottery ticket felt like a live coal against his chest, burning through fabric and flesh straight to his soul. Fay Act 3 Fay, the reveal Fay David's apartment, was a monument to downward mobility. What had once been temporary bachelor lodgings after his divorce had become permanent residence after his bankruptcy. The walls were thin enough to hear his neighbor's television, and the carpet was a color that might generously be called optimistic beige. But it was home, or as close to home as a man could get, when the bank owned everything else he'd ever loved. He sat at his kitchen table, a card table bought from a thrift store, and stared at the lottery ticket under the harsh fluorescent light. The numbers seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, like a heartbeat made of ink and possibility. $22 million. Even after taxes, it would be enough to rebuild everything. More than enough. His laptop, a battered Dell that had survived 3 moves and countless overdue notices, hummed to life with the enthusiasm of a dying man. David's fingers hesitated over the keyboard before typing Harold Grayson Vietnam curse. The search results were a mixture of genealogy sites and military records. Nothing unusual. But when he refined his search to include lottery and money curse, the internet revealed its darker corners. Forums dedicated to lottery winners who'd lost everything. Stories of jackpot recipients who'd died under mysterious circumstances. Articles about the lottery curse. The statistical nightmare that befell so many sudden millionaires. But these were just statistics, David told himself. Correlation, not causation. People who bought lottery tickets were often already struggling financially. Of course, many of them would have problems managing sudden wealth. It wasn't supernatural. It was sociological. He was about to close the laptop when a link caught his eye. The Grayson family tragedy, a Vietnam vet's long road to nowhere. The article was from the Riverside Tribune, dated 3 months after Harold's death. David clicked the link, and Harold's story unfolded like a map of misery. Born in 1949, enlisted in the Army at 18. Served 2 tours in Vietnam with distinction. Returned home in 1971 to marry his high school sweetheart, Virginia Matthews. Started a construction company, just like David had 20 years later. But then the parallels became darker. Harold's company had failed in 1987 during a recession. He'd lost his house, his savings, his reputation. For the next 30 years, Harold had drifted from job to job, never quite able to get back on his feet. Virginia had developed cancer in 2006, and the medical bills had finished what the economic disasters had started. The article mentioned something else that made David's blood run cold. Harold had won a smaller lottery prize in 1988, $50,000, just before his construction company collapsed. He'd used the money to try to save the business, but within 6 months, he'd lost everything. According to Virginia's sister, quoted in the article, Harold had become convinced that the lottery money was cursed. He'd never bought another ticket, never gambled, never even entered a church raffle. Until the night Virginia died, David's phone buzzed with a text message that made his heart skip. Heard you bought Harold's unit. Find anything interesting? Jim David stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it without responding. Big Jim's interest was more than casual curiosity. The man had a nose for valuable items that bordered on supernatural. If he suspected David had found something significant, another buzz. This time it was his ex-wife, Sarah. "David, I know things are hard right now, but Emma needs her school supplies. Can you help at all?" Emma, his daughter who was 8 years old and still believed her daddy could fix anything, who drew him pictures of houses with white picket fences and stick figures of their family standing together in front yards that David would never be able to afford, who asked why Daddy lived in the small apartment instead of the big house where she used to have her own room. $2 million would give Emma everything she deserved. Private schools, college tuition, a father who wasn't a cautionary tale about overextension and bad timing. It would give her a daddy she could be proud of again. David picked up the lottery ticket and held it to the light. The paper was cheap, the kind that felt like it would disintegrate if you looked at it wrong. But the numbers were clear, bold, undeniable. A combination that had beaten odds of 302 million to 1, sitting abandoned in a dead man's storage unit because that dead man believed it was haunted by the ghosts of Vietnam and bad luck. But what if Harold had been right? David thought about his own trajectory. The construction company that had thrived for a decade before the housing market collapsed. The marriage that had survived business stress, financial pressure, and his own stubborn pride until the foreclosure notice arrived. The slow slide from middle-class respectability to this fluorescent, lit purgatory where he counted pennies and avoided phone calls. Was it possible that success and failure moved in patterns too complex for human understanding? That some doors once opened led to places from which there was no return? His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but David answered anyway. These days, unknown numbers were usually collection agencies, but sometimes they were potential work. David Chen. The voice was female, professional, with a slight accent he couldn't place. Speaking. "My name is Dr. Sarah Whitmore. I am a researcher at the University of Texas studying lottery winner outcomes. I understand you may have come into possession of an unclaimed ticket." David's blood turned to ice water. "I am sorry. I think you have the wrong number. Mr. Chen, I know this sounds strange, but I've been tracking certain patterns in lottery wins, particularly those connected to veterans of foreign wars. Harold Grayson's name came up in my research, and public records show you purchased his storage unit. I'd like to talk to you about what you might have found. I don't know what you are talking about." "Mr. Chen, please don't hang up. I know about the ticket. I know about the numbers, and I know what happened to the last 3 people who claimed prizes using numbers from similar sources." David's hand was shaking so badly he nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean? Can we meet?" "There are things you need to know before you make any decisions about that ticket. Things that Harold Grayson spent 30 years trying to forget. Fay Act 4, Fay the Aftermath, Fay the coffee shop Dr. Whitmore had chosen, was the kind of place where graduate students came to die slowly over laptops and failed dissertations. She sat in the corner booth, a woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. When David approached, she gestured for him to sit across from her with the weary authority of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. "Thank you for coming," she said, wrapping her hands around a coffee cup like it was an anchor. "I know this all sounds insane. You said you knew about the ticket." David's voice was barely above a whisper. "I know about the numbers. 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, and 10. She recited them like an incantation. "They're not random, Mr. Chen. They're coordinates." David felt the world tilt beneath him. Coordinates to what? A village in Vietnam, My Lai adjacent. The 16th of March, 1968. Her voice was clinical, but David caught the tremor underneath. Harold Grayson was there, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion. The blood drained from David's face. Every American knew about my lie, even if they tried not to think about it. The massacre that had stained the Vietnam War with a darkness that no amount of time could wash away. Harold wasn't part of the killings, Dr. Whitmore continued quickly. But he was there. He saw it happen. And like many of the soldiers who witnessed it, he carried that guilt for the rest of his life. She pulled out a manila folder and spread its contents across the table like tarot cards, photographs, newspaper clippings, military records. David recognized Harold in one of the photos, young, lean, his eyes already carrying shadows that hadn't been there in the storage unit picture. The numbers came to him in dreams, Dr. Whitmore said, coordinates that had been seared into his memory, dates that wouldn't let him sleep. When Virginia died, the dreams got worse. He started playing those numbers in the lottery, convinced it was some kind of penance. When he won, he realized the truth. What truth? That some debts can't be paid with money, that the universe doesn't balance books the way we think it does. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Mr. Chen, I've tracked 17 lottery winners who used numbers connected to wartime trauma, dates of battles, coordinates of mass graves, serial numbers from death camps. Every single one of them lost everything within 5 years. And I don't mean bad luck. I mean everything. Families, health, sanity, life itself. David's mouth was dry as sand. That is just coincidence, survivor's guilt, bad financial planning. Michael Kowalski, 143 million, using numbers from Auschwitz camp records. Dead of a heart attack at 38, 6 months after claiming his prize. Jennifer Martinez used coordinates from her grandfather's letters about Normandy. Car accident, no survivors. Investigation found no mechanical failure. Thomas Brennan. His father's squad number from Korea. House fire, electrical fault, that 3 independent investigators couldn't explain. She slid another photo across the table. David's breath caught in his throat. It was Harold, but not the Harold he'd known. This Harold was maybe 35, standing in front of a beautiful house with Virginia at his side, both of them smiling with the confidence of people who believe the world was fundamentally fair. In Harold's hand was an oversized check, $50,000 from the Texas State Lottery. This was taken in 1988, 2 days after Harold claimed his first prize. 6 months later, his company was bankrupt. Virginia's cancer was diagnosed 18 years to the day after this photo was taken. David stared at the picture until the faces began to blur. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Harold asked me to." She reached into her purse and pulled out a cassette tape, the kind David hadn't seen in years. "He contacted me 3 months before he died, said he had a story I needed to hear for my research. This is his confession." David looked at the tape like it was a live snake. "I can't. You need to hear this, both of us do." Dr. Whitmore pulled out an ancient portable cassette player and hit play. The speakers crackled with static. Then Harold's voice filled the space between them, older and more broken than David remembered, but unmistakably him. My name is Harold James Grayson. And I've been carrying a ghost for 50 years. I was at my lie. I didn't pull any triggers, but I didn't stop it either. I was 19 years old and scared out of my mind, and I watched good men do evil things while I stood frozen like a deer in headlights. Asterisk, asterisk. The numbers came to me that day. 7 wounded kids hiding in a hut. 14 dead women in the village square. 21 minutes. From start to finish. 28 days until we rotated out. 35 years old was the oldest victim I saw. Grid coordinate 10. Asterisk, asterisk. I tried to forget them, but they wouldn't let me sleep. When Virginia got sick, when the bills started piling up, when I felt most desperate, Those numbers would whisper to me like siren songs. Use us, they said. We're your salvation. Asterisk, asterisk. But salvation built on blood money isn't salvation at all. It is just another kind of damnation. I won $50,000 with those numbers, and it cost me everything I loved. When Virginia was dying, delirious from the chemo, she made me promise something. She said the numbers were hungry, that they fed on guilt and despair, and wouldn't stop until they'd consumed everything good in our lives. Asterisk, asterisk, I should have burned that second ticket when I bought it. But grief makes you stupid, makes you think you can bargain with forces that don't understand mercy. If someone finds it, if someone thinks they can use it, tell them what I learned too late: some doors should never be opened. Some debts can only be paid with everything you are. Asterisk, the tape clicked off, leaving silence as heavy as stone. David sat in that silence for a long time, feeling the weight of the ticket in his pocket like a tumor growing against his chest. Across from him, Dr. Whitmore waited with the patience of someone who had delivered this news before. "What happened to Harold?" David finally asked. "Heart attack, alone in his apartment. The paramedic said he'd been dead for 3 days before anyone found him." She gathered her papers and photos, stacking them with academic precision. But his last utility bill was paid in full. First time in 15 years he wasn't behind on something. David walked out of the coffee shop feeling like a man underwater. The world looked the same: cars passing on the street, people walking their dogs, the sun setting behind strip malls and fast food signs. But everything felt muffled, distant, unreal. His phone buzzed with another text from Big Jim. "Still thinking about that storage unit. Let me know if you change your mind about what was in there." Another buzz, this one from Emma. "Daddy, can you come to my school play next Friday? I am going to be a tree. Love you, 20, $2 million. Enough to be there for every school play, every graduation, every moment that mattered in his daughter's life. Enough to stop being the father who disappointed her, the man who'd lost everything that was supposed to matter." But Harold's voice echoed in his memory. "Face-'em debts can only be paid with everything you are." Asterisk David stood at the crossroads of his life, the lottery ticket burning in his pocket like a coal from hell's own furnace, and realized that some choices were too terrible to make alone. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a text to his ex-wife. "Sarah, I need to tell you about something. Can we talk?" But as he hit send, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was already too late, that the simple act of finding the ticket had set forces in motion that couldn't be stopped. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled from a clear sky, and the street lights began to flicker like dying stars. The lottery ticket remained in his pocket, its numbers pulsing with their own dark rhythm, waiting. And David Chen stood at the edge of tomorrow, afraid to step forward and unable to step back, carrying $22 million worth of other people's blood money, and wondering if redemption was just another word for damnation in disguise. The curse had found its next keeper, but whether he would become its victim or its destroyer remained written in numbers that only the dead could read.